Hello everyone, and welcome to this short video on opportunity analysis. Now that we've established why opportunities and ideas are critical in the entrepreneurship process, what I want to talk about in this lecture is how we might go about identifying and analysing opportunities and deciding which opportunities we're actually going to try and take advantage of. Now in doing this, I'm going to draw heavily on some work that was done by a guy called Tim Mazerol. Tim was previously at the UTS Business School. I think he's now currently over in Curtin. And Tim is one of Australia's leading authors in the area of entrepreneurship thinking, entrepreneurship practice. And he gives us a few very important things we might want to consider when we're talking about opportunity analysis in the context of entrepreneurial ventures. So let's start off again by defining what we mean by an opportunity. I quite like this definition that's provided by Timmins in 1999, which says that an opportunity has the qualities of being attractive, durable and timely, and is anchored in a product or service which creates or adds values for its buyers or end users. So it really situates an opportunity for us. It's linked to what we can do now, what we might be able to do in the future, and very much linked to how we create value for the consumer or the end user of our particular product. One of the very important things we talked about already in relation to opportunities is that an opportunity has to create new value. If you create new value, then you're likely to attract more consumers to your organisation. Now the problem we see is that entrepreneurs find it really difficult to assess the validity of different opportunities. An entrepreneur is often presented with multiple opportunities, and they need to make a determination about which opportunities are most suitable for their organisation. Why is this so? What are some of the problems that entrepreneurs face? Mazerol outlines for us a number of key points, a number of key reasons that entrepreneurs face problems in identifying opportunities. The first one is a lack of market analysis. It's very important whenever we're starting off any new business that we do undertake a detailed analysis of the market, and often entrepreneurs go into a situation of developing a business idea without really fully having an understanding of what's happening in their market and what are the likely changes and trends that might impact on that market in the future. We also know from the research that entrepreneurs tend to overestimate the impact that marketing may have in getting people to buy products. I think a lot of the time people think that if they just run a very sophisticated marketing campaign, that even if the product's not that good or doesn't provide a lot of additional value, then people would decide to buy that product. And I don't think that's borne out in actual fact. I think what we also see is that many entrepreneurs tend to underestimate competitors. We always assume that competitors are off busy doing their own thing and aren't interested in what we might be doing as a new startup venture. But if you're an organisation that's highly dependent on that market, you're going to be looking at any new startup business very carefully and trying to see what their efforts might mean for your particular organisation. So I do think that there is a lack of understanding amongst many entrepreneurs about what competitors may do in the future. There's often a poor assessment of the pros and cons of the different strategic options that are available to an organisation at any one time. Biases tend to creep into the assessment process where people really tend to like an idea, particularly if it's an idea that they've come up with. And as a result, that tends to lead to over-optimistic predictions about how successful they'll be with that opportunity. There's often a poor assessment, and this is particularly true of ongoing businesses, of the linkages and effects and relationships between new products and existing products, and what this new product or new opportunity might mean for our existing business. And so if you don't have a full handle or grasp on what that might mean for your organisation, then you're likely to make bad decisions about which opportunities to pursue. We often have a problem of conflicting options. It's rare that an organisation will just have one opportunity or one activity that they're trying to pursue. In fact, what we know is that many organisations are pursuing multiple options at any one point in time. And often that can be done deliberately as a way of reducing our risk or exposure at any point in time. So when we have conflicting options, when we have different things that are on the table, we really need a sound process in place to help us determine what opportunities we should take advantage of. Another problem that many startup businesses face is the lack of matching resources to strategy. Now, we have a great idea about what we're going to do, but we don't actually have the resources available to us, whether we own those resources or can access those resources from other people, that will enable us to take advantage of that opportunity effectively. And often organisations, particularly in that startup phase, do a really superficial financial analysis. They don't have a really good understanding of what their cost structures are, what their revenue profile is likely to look like, what their cash flow will be, and tend to underestimate what their likely viability is going to look like into the future. And because of these reasons, we're able to identify a number of causes for failure in startup businesses. And again, Mazerol talks about these in great detail in the chapter. So often small businesses fail because they have a lack of capital. Unless you've got the working capital needed to run and operate your business, particularly in those early stages when your business is burning cash, then that makes it very difficult for your business to succeed long term. So it's really critical that we think about our capital, think about our investments that we have available to us, and how we might most effectively use those. We also know that many small businesses fail because they have poor financial management processes in place, that they don't do a good job of managing effectively their financial position. Another major source of failure in startup businesses can be linked to experience, whether it's a lack of experience in the industry, so you might have been very successful at competing in another industry, but that experience might not translate well into a new industry context where you're trying to compete. Or you may not have any experience at managing people. Now, lack of management experience in and of itself is not necessarily a problem, because some people might be very good at managing people when they're first given the opportunity. But I think the evidence shows us that the more people have the management skills, whether it's personal management or management of other people, the more likely they are to be successful in the startup process. We also know that the planning is critical. Whether planning is formal or informal, organisations really do need to plan out what they're trying to do in the startup process. Some people are critical of the planning approach. They think that it's constraining, that the operating environment is so dynamic that organisations can't effectively plan. And look, there's no doubt that the operating environment will undermine at every turn the plan that we put in place. But without a plan, we really don't know what we're trying to do. We don't know what our objectives are, we don't know clearly what our strategies are, and what it is the organisation is trying to achieve. And so again, a lack of that planning focus, whether it's overall business planning, whether it's marketing planning, financial planning, tend to be sources of failure in most small businesses. Another source of failure is that people often are reluctant to go outside of their business to get professional advice. It's easy to be critical of accounting services or legal services and saying that they're really just in it to make money. But we're talking about people with high levels of expertise in their area. And getting advice from those people early on in the startup process might be critical to your ongoing success. Another issue that can impact on failure is people's education. Now, there's not a strong correlation between formal education or the level of education and your success as an entrepreneur. And I'd be reluctant to say that every entrepreneur needs to go to university, because I don't think that's the case. But I think when we talk about education, we're talking about an openness to knowledge. And I think the more open people are to knowledge and gaining new knowledge, the more likely they are to succeed in a business venture. Some other problems that we might see that might lead to failure in the startup process could be issues around staffing, not having access to the right number of people to actually run your business, or getting the right mix of skills that you need available to you at the right time to be successful. It might be the timing by which you actually deliver your service into the market. Sometimes your product might simply be too early or too late. The market might have already moved on, and that type of product is no longer seen as being appropriate within that particular product category. We know that the overall economic cycle can have a big impact on the performance of our organisation. So from time to time, the economy experiences periods of great growth and periods of great decline. And so that overall economic pattern can really undermine your efforts as a small business. Think about what happened recently in the global financial crisis, where a lot of quite stable businesses ended up going out of business purely because of the overall economic crisis that was affecting the global economic system. We also know that things like the age of people setting up the business, how old or how young they are, whether they've got the right sort of partners, can also be, and we're talking about business partners, can be a cause of success or failure. Partnering and relationships are really critical in all forms of business, and so making sure you have the right relationships in place can be critical to your ongoing success. Even things like the parental background of your parents. Again, if you've grown up in a household where your parents have been entrepreneurial, where they've started their businesses, then it may be that you're likely to be more successful because you had a much greater exposure to that from an earlier age. So when a new business is starting out, Mazerol tells us that there's a couple of key questions that we really need to be sure we know answers to before we progress our business venture. Okay? And again, Mazerol talks about these in detail in the chapter, and I encourage you to go and read that chapter and think through what some of these major questions might be. So some of the questions we need to ask are, who is the customer? Okay? We really need to be clear in our mind who is buying this product and why they're buying it. What is the underlying need that is driving that purchase? And how do they make the decision? How do they decide to buy our product relative to other products? What influences that decision process? Do they make the decision on their own? Are they influenced by family and friends? Is price a critical part of the decision process for the individual consumer? Is the product itself compelling? Is there enough reason for the consumer to stop purchasing their existing products and start purchasing new products to use within their organisation? We've got to think really clearly about how the product will be priced, what will be the end price of that product in the market, and how will we actually distribute that product into the market? How will we actually get it out to the consumer? Increasingly, distribution is handled through things like websites, selling products through eBay or Taobao if you're in China. These sorts of methodologies for selling are increasingly being used by startup businesses. We also need to think very carefully about costs, and costs in a couple of different areas. We need to think about how much it costs to acquire customers. Now we're not buying the customer, but what we're doing is spending money on advertising and relationship building, which will add to the overall costs of running our business. So we need to be really clear about what it's going to cost us to acquire that customer. We need to think about how much it's going to cost us to produce the product. What are the production costs? How do we keep those costs down? Because the lower we keep the costs, the more value we might create for the customer in our organisation. And how much is it going to cost to support the customer? Because once the customer starts buying your product, there's likely to be ongoing supports that they need. So for example, at a university, there's the cost of actually initially acquiring a student, bringing them into the university, but then there's the ongoing costs associated with keeping that student in their studies and ensuring that they progress effectively through the degree. And we need to think about how easy it is to retain a customer. Remember, if we've gained customers by taking them from other organisations, it's likely that other organisations are going to do the same thing to us. So at the end of the chapter, Mazerol asks us a couple of, gives us a checklist, a series of key things that we need to think about in the startup process. And I think it's really important for us to look at these 6 areas or 6 things to understand when we're trying to work out the attractiveness of an opportunity. So Mazerol says we need to think about what are the motivations and determinations of the owner manager. Motivation is really critical in a startup business. Do we have the time, the effort, the commitment that's required to make that venture a success? We need to think about the business idea itself. Is it marketable? Is it a product concept that would be easily approachable and accessible to the consumer? Is it something in the product that the customer is actually willing to buy? We need to think about the availability of resources. Do we have the right resources available to us at the time we need them to launch this business and take the business to market? We need to think about the overall skills and abilities of the entrepreneur. Do they have the skills that are needed, not just the motivations, to actually run a startup business effectively? We need to think about the type of planning process we've been through. And do we have the right sorts of plans in place to ensure business success? And we need to think very carefully about how the business will be administered and managed. So as I said, in the chapter, Mazerol walks you through those 6 areas, those 6 things in the checklist that you need to consider. And I'd encourage all of you to have a look at those before you go on and think about how you would assess an opportunity effectively.